The office building of Reynolds Tech stood tall and imposing against the dark morning sky. At exactly 4:30 am, a middle-aged woman made her way through the empty parking lot, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She carried her cleaning supplies in one hand and her beat-up leather bag in the other, just like she had done every morning for the past 15 years. Most people saw her as just another cleaning lady. They didn't know about the 2 degrees hanging on her small apartment wall, one in business administration and another in computer science. They didn't know about the countless nights she spent studying after her shifts, or how she graduated at the top of her class while working 3 jobs. She had chosen this path carefully, though many questioned her decision to work as a cleaner despite her qualifications. Why would someone so educated mop floors? They'd ask. But she had a plan, one that required patience, observation, and understanding the company from its very foundation. Every morning she started with the executive floor. Her hands moved methodically, dusting the expensive furniture and wiping down the glass walls of conference rooms where million-dollar decisions were made. In these quiet hours, she noticed things others missed. The documents carelessly left on desks, the conversations that lingered in the air during late-night meetings she overheard while cleaning nearby, and the patterns of how the company truly operated. What made her different wasn't just her education, it was her sharp mind and attention to detail. She took mental notes of everything, understanding the significance of the papers she glimpsed while cleaning desks and the meetings she overheard. Her background in business and technology helped her piece together the puzzle of what was really happening at Reynolds Tech. As she cleaned, she would sometimes pause to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city slowly wake up. The security guards trusted her completely. After all, she had been there longer than most of them. They never questioned when she spent extra time cleaning certain areas or when she arrived earlier than usual. But beyond her cleaning duties, she had been making strategic moves. Every month, she invested a portion of her salary in company stock. It wasn't much at first, just a few shares here and there. But over 15 years, those small investments had grown significantly, especially since she knew exactly when to buy and sell based on her unique position within the company. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She could hear the first employees starting to arrive, their expensive cars pulling into the parking lot. Soon, the offices would be full of people who looked right through her, who never bothered to learn her name, who treated her as if she were invisible. Little did they know that this invisible cleaning lady understood more about their company than most of them ever would. She knew about the questionable decisions made behind closed doors, the unfair treatment of lower-level employees, and the wasteful spending that plagued the upper management. As the elevator dinged and the first wave of employees stepped onto the floor, she quietly gathered her cleaning supplies. She nodded politely at the passing workers who barely acknowledged her presence. But underneath her humble demeanor, a plan was forming, one that would soon shake the very foundation of Reynolds Tech and change everything these people thought they knew about the cleaning lady they had underestimated for so long. The morning light now streamed through the windows, marking the end of another early shift. But for her, this was more than just a job. It was the first step in a carefully orchestrated plan that had taken 15 years to put into motion. And soon, very soon, everyone would understand just how much they had underestimated the woman they simply knew as the cleaning lady. The morning executive meeting was in full swing on the top floor of Reynolds Tech. The cleaning lady quietly went about her work, wiping down the glass walls outside the conference room. Inside, 10 executives in expensive suits sat around a mahogany table, discussing quarterly profits as if she didn't exist. The CEO's voice carried through the glass as he gestured dramatically with his coffee cup. "We need to cut costs somewhere," he announced to the nodding heads around him. "Maybe start with the cleaning staff." He smirked, deliberately loud enough for her to hear. She kept her head down, continuing her work as she had done countless times before. Her hands moved steadily across the glass, but her mind was sharp and alert, taking in every word. After 15 years, she had mastered the art of being invisible while seeing everything. Speaking of which, the CEO's voice boomed as he pushed his chair back and stood up. He walked to where his coffee cup sat at the edge of the table and, with a slight movement that looked almost accidental, knocked it over. Dark liquid spread across the polished surface, dripping onto the plushed carpet. "Oh dear," he said with fake concern, opening the conference room door. "We need some cleaning in here." His voice dripped with condescension as he beckoned her inside. The other executives shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. She entered quietly, cleaning supplies in hand. As she knelt to clean the spill, someone whispered, "At least she knows her place." A few chuckles followed, quickly masked by fake coughs. The coffee had been deliberately spilled, she knew that much. It wasn't the first time, and probably wouldn't be the last. As she worked, the executives continued their meeting, talking over her head about million-dollar decisions as if she were just another piece of furniture. "Maybe we should make her our new chief financial officer," the CEO joked, earning more nervous laughter from his team. "She's certainly good with numbers, counting those floor tiles all day." Little did they know that she actually understood every financial term they threw around. While they mocked her, she mentally noted their discussion about the upcoming merger, the planned layoffs in the tech department, and the questionable accounting practices they were trying to hide. The coffee spill took barely 5 minutes to clean, but they stretched those minutes with more snide comments and barely concealed sneers. She kept her face neutral, years of practice helping her maintain her composure. Inside, though, she wasn't hurt. She was taking mental notes of every person who laughed, every uncomfortable shuffle, every sign of weak leadership. As she gathered her cleaning supplies to leave, the CEO called out, "Make sure you get all of it. We wouldn't want anyone to slip." More laughter followed her out the door. Back in the hallway, she resumed her window cleaning, but now she could clearly hear their conversation about the company's future. They had no idea that while they were plotting cost cuts and layoffs, she had been steadily building her own power base within the company. Through her earpiece, hidden by her hair, she was recording every word of their discriminatory behavior. Her phone, tucked safely in her pocket, was capturing it all. Not for a lawsuit, she had bigger plans than that. Each insult they threw at her only confirmed what she already knew. They were poor leaders who underestimated everyone around them. Their arrogance made them sloppy, leaving confidential documents in plain sight and speaking freely about sensitive information in front of someone they considered beneath their notice. As the meeting wrapped up, executives filed out past her, some avoiding eye contact, others acting as if she were invisible. The CEO was the last to leave, deliberately walking across the spot she had just cleaned with his muddy shoes. She watched them disperse to their corner offices, knowing that their time at the top was limited. While they saw a simple cleaning lady, she was actually their biggest shareholder, quietly acquiring stock for years. Soon, very soon, they would learn the cost of their arrogance, and she would be the one teaching that lesson. After everyone had gone home for the day, the cleaning lady moved quietly through the dark offices with purpose. These late hours were her most valuable time, when the building was empty except for the night security guard who trusted her completely. While others saw her cleaning the executive floor, they never realized she was gathering evidence of every questionable decision made within these walls. Her small apartment had become a command center of sorts. One wall was covered with sticky notes and printouts, tracking patterns she'd observed over the years. She documented everything, from overheard conversations about suspicious overseas accounts to emails carelessly left open on computer screens during her early morning shifts. Tonight, she carefully photographed a document left on the CFO's desk, another example of creative accounting that wouldn't look good to the shareholders. The executives were so confident in their superiority that they never bothered to clean their desks or log out of their computers. Their arrogance had become her greatest advantage. Her phone contained voice recordings of discriminatory comments, dates, times, and the names of those present. She wasn't just cleaning offices, she was building a case. Each insult thrown her way was another piece of evidence showing the toxic culture these leaders had created. Working methodically through the CEO's office, she noticed a new memo about upcoming layoffs in the IT department. The same department that had just saved the company millions by preventing a major security breach. She added this to her growing collection of evidence showing how poor management decisions were hurting the company. The cleaning lady smiled slightly as she remembered her college days when she'd specialized in corporate governance and ethics. Now those lessons were proving invaluable as she identified every violation and questionable practice. Her business degree had taught her exactly what to look for, and her computer science background helped her understand the technical implications of their decisions. She paused at the window, looking out at the city lights. In her pocket was a USB drive containing copies of emails proving the CEO had known about serious product defects, but chose to hide them. It wasn't just about revenge for her, it was about protecting employees who would lose their jobs due to bad leadership and customers who trusted the company's products. The security cameras recorded her doing her usual cleaning routine, but they couldn't see how she was using her phone to document everything. She had timed each movement perfectly over the years, knowing exactly how long it should take to clean each office, never raising suspicion by staying too long in one place. In the conference room, she found presentation slides for next week's board meeting. The numbers didn't match what she'd seen in other documents, another example of how the executive team manipulated data to make themselves look good. Her financial knowledge helped her spot these discrepancies instantly. A light flickered on in a distant office, and she quickly resumed her cleaning duties. A late working employee walked by, not even glancing her way. That was the beauty of being invisible. No one suspected that the cleaning lady understood every financial report, every technical specification, every business strategy they so carelessly left exposed. Back in her apartment later that night, she updated her files. The wall of evidence had grown impressive over the years, each piece carefully categorized and cross-referenced. Unlike the messy offices she cleaned, her own records were meticulously organized. Years of being underestimated had taught her the value of patience and precision. The executives thought their position at the top was secure. They never imagined that the woman they mocked was actually their most dangerous opponent. While they focused on their golf games and luxury cars, she had been slowly building a case that would change everything. She looked at her stock portfolio one last time before going to bed. The shares she'd been quietly buying for years had grown significantly in value. Soon, very soon, she would reveal herself as one of the company's largest individual shareholders, and when that day came, all the evidence she'd gathered would ensure that justice would finally be served. The downtown coffee shop buzzed with morning activity as the cleaning lady sat in a corner booth, dressed in a simple but professional outfit instead of her usual work uniform. Across from her sat a distinguished older woman, one of Reynolds Tech's longtime shareholders who had grown increasingly concerned about the company's direction. "I've reviewed the documents you shared," the shareholder said quietly, stirring her coffee. "I had no idea things were this bad. The numbers they showed us at the last meeting painted a completely different picture." 15 years of careful planning had led to this moment. The cleaning lady had spent years identifying other shareholders who shared her concerns about the company's leadership. She'd reached out carefully, building trust one conversation at a time. Her own investment in the company had grown substantially. Each paycheck, she bought more shares, watching the price fluctuate based on information she gathered during her early morning shifts. When executives made poor decisions, she bought more, knowing the stock price would eventually recover under better leadership. "There are others who feel the same way," the shareholder continued. "Board members who've noticed the discrepancies but couldn't prove anything. You've given us the evidence we needed." The cleaning lady nodded, thinking about the thick folder of documents in her bag. Years of overheard conversations and photographed evidence had shown her exactly when to buy shares and which other shareholders to approach. Her business degree had taught her to follow the money, and that's exactly what she'd done. She pulled out her laptop, showing the shareholder her own stock holdings. The older woman's eyes widened. "You own that much of the company," she whispered. "How did you manage this on a cleaner's salary?" "Patience," she replied simply. "And knowing when to invest." She didn't mention the 3 extra jobs she'd worked, the tiny apartment she'd lived in, or the vacations she'd never taken. Every spare dollar had gone into building her stake in the company. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another shareholder, a retired investment banker who had inherited a significant portion of Reynolds Tech stock from his father. He'd been skeptical at first, but the evidence she'd shared had convinced him that change was necessary. Together, they reviewed their strategy. The cleaning lady had already secured support from several other major shareholders. Many were angry about how the current leadership's poor decisions had affected the company's value. Others were concerned about the toxic workplace culture she'd documented. "The annual shareholders' meeting is in 2 weeks," the investment banker noted, checking his calendar. "That's our chance. With our combined voting power, we can force real change." She smiled slightly, remembering all the times the CEO had walked past her without a glance. He had no idea that the woman he humiliated daily now controlled enough shares to challenge his leadership. The very money he paid her to clean his office had helped her buy the power to remove him from it. Back in her apartment that evening, she reviewed her stock portfolio one last time. The shares she'd accumulated over 15 years represented more than just money. They represented every early morning, every insult endured, every careful observation made while being treated as invisible. On her wall, next to the evidence she'd gathered, hung a single-frame document, her first stock purchase in Reynolds Tech. She'd bought it the day after watching the CEO humiliate a young employee in front of everyone. That day, she'd decided that someday she would be in a position to stop such behavior. The next 2 weeks would change everything. The executives who'd laughed at her would soon learn that she owned more of their company than most of them combined. Their judgment had been so clouded by prejudice that they'd never noticed her methodical accumulation of power. She checked her presentation for the shareholders' meeting one last time. Everything was in place: the evidence, the allies, the voting numbers. Soon, very soon, the invisible cleaning lady would step into the light, and nothing at Reynolds Tech would ever be the same. The morning of the shareholders' meeting arrived with a mix of tension and anticipation. The grand conference room at Reynolds Tech was filling up with shareholders, board members, and executives. The cleaning lady had arrived early, but not to clean. Instead, she waited quietly in a nearby office, dressed in a crisp business suit she bought months ago for this very day. Through the glass walls, she could see the CEO at the head of the table, shuffling papers and laughing with other executives. He'd walked past her just yesterday, spilling his coffee deliberately as usual, never imagining that today everything would change. She checked her reflection one last time. Gone was the cleaning uniform she'd worn for 15 years. Her hair was elegantly styled, and her posture radiated confidence. In her briefcase were the documents that would shake Reynolds Tech to its foundation. The meeting began right on schedule. The CEO started his usual presentation about company performance, throwing around impressive-sounding numbers that she knew were manipulated. She watched through the glass as he confidently misled the shareholders, just as he'd done for years. "And now, we'll move on to the voting portion of our meeting," the board secretary announced. That was her cue. The room fell silent as she walked in. A few executives blinked in confusion, trying to place where they'd seen her before. The CEO was mid-sentence when he recognized her, his words trailing off into stunned silence. "Good morning," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the room. "As one of the company's largest individual shareholders, I believe I have something to contribute to this discussion." The CEO's face turned pale. You're the cleaning lady," he stammered, his usual arrogance cracking. "I am," she replied calmly. "I'm also a business school graduate with a degree in computer science, and over the past 15 years, while you were ignoring me, I was paying very close attention to how this company is being run." She opened her briefcase and began distributing documents to the board members. The room remained absolutely silent as people started reading. Several shareholders gasped as they realized what they were seeing. These documents show systematic mismanagement, discriminatory practices, and deliberate manipulation of company data, she explained. "I spent 15 years gathering evidence of decisions that have hurt this company's employees, its shareholders, and its future." One of the board members looked up from the papers, his face showing shock. "These numbers, they're completely different from what we've been shown in our reports." The CEO tried to interrupt, but she continued steadily. "I've already shared this information with several major shareholders. Together, we control enough voting power to demand immediate changes in leadership." The executives who had laughed at her just days ago now sat frozen in their expensive chairs. The CFO was sweating visibly as he flipped through the pages detailing his creative accounting practices. She turned to address the entire room. "I chose to work as a cleaner because I wanted to understand this company from the ground up. What I found was a leadership team so arrogant they couldn't imagine the cleaning lady understanding their business decisions. So careless they left sensitive documents in plain sight. So confident in their position that they never noticed me buying more shares every month." The room erupted in murmurs as she projected her stock holdings onto the screen. The CEO's mouth opened and closed without sound as he saw the numbers. The very money they'd paid her to clean their offices had helped her build the power to challenge their leadership. Today, she continued, her voice strong and clear, we'll be voting on new leadership for Reynolds Tech. Leadership that understands the value of every employee, regardless of their position. Leadership that will bring transparency and ethical behavior back to this company. As she looked around the room, she saw respect replacing the dismissal she'd faced for 15 years. The shareholders were nodding, the board members were sitting up straighter, and the executives who had mocked her were shrinking in their seats. The time had finally come for the cleaning lady to clean house, starting at the very top. The tension in the boardroom could be cut with a knife. The CEO, who just minutes ago had been confidently presenting misleading figures, now stood with his hands gripping the back of his chair, knuckles white with strain. These accusations are ridiculous, he sputtered, trying to regain control of the room. Are we really going to listen to a cleaning lady? His attempt at dismissal fell flat as shareholders continued reading through the evidence she provided. Let's address these documents one by one, she said calmly, pulling up the first presentation slide. 3 months ago, the board was told the new product launch was a success. Here's what really happened. She played an audio recording from her phone, the CEO's own voice admitting to major defects in the product, followed by him ordering his team to hide the problems from customers and the board. The timestamp showed this conversation happened 2 weeks before the glowing report to shareholders. That's illegal recording, the CEO protested weakly. Actually, it's not, she replied. Company policy, which you signed, clearly states that all common areas and meeting rooms may be recorded for security purposes. I simply accessed the security recordings, as I was authorized to do as part of the cleaning staff responsible for the security office. A board member leaned forward. What else do you have? She clicked to the next slide. Here are the real financial reports compared to what you were shown. Notice the discrepancies in the international divisions numbers. She pointed to specific lines, her business degree evident in how easily she broke down complex financial data. The CFO jumped in. Those numbers are taken out of context. Really? She asked, pulling up another document. Then perhaps you can explain this email chain where you discussed how to hide the losses from the board. The CFO sank back into his chair, his face ashen. One of the biggest shareholders stood up. I've seen enough. I moved for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current leadership. The CEO's face turned red. This is absurd. She's just a cleaner. She's trying to manipulate you all with fake documents and... Every document here, she cut in firmly, has been verified by independent auditors. I've spent 15 years watching you make decisions that hurt this company. I've seen you fire dedicated employees while covering up your own mistakes. I've watched you waste company money on personal luxuries while cutting benefits for workers. She turned to address the whole room. But most importantly, I've witnessed how this leadership team's arrogance has blinded them to opportunities and threats alike. They were so convinced of their own superiority that they never bothered to secure their documents, protect their communications, or even consider that someone they saw as just a cleaner could understand their business. A murmur of agreement spread through the room. Another board member stood up. I second the motion for a vote of no confidence. The CEO made one last desperate attempt. The stock will crash if you do this. We'll all lose money. Actually, she said, pulling up another slide, I've already discussed this with major investors and market analysts. They believe removing corrupt leadership will increase shareholder value in the long term. Would you like to see their reports? The room had completely transformed. The executives who had once mocked her now sat silent and defeated. The shareholders who might have dismissed her an hour ago were now nodding in agreement with every point she made. The board secretary stood up. We'll proceed with the vote of no confidence. Please raise your hands if... Wait, the CEO interrupted. At least give us a chance to respond to these allegations. We need time to... You've had 15 years, she said quietly. I've watched you waste every chance you were given. Now it's time for change. The secretary began counting hands. The CEO watched in horror as his support crumbled, shareholder by shareholder, until it was clear his time at the top was over. The cleaning lady stood quietly, watching justice unfold. Sometimes, she thought, The most thorough cleaning had to start at the very top. The boardroom had transformed into a scene of quiet chaos. The former CEO sat slumped in his chair, tie loosened, as security waited by the door. Around the room, board members and shareholders were still processing the historic vote that had just taken place. "The vote is final," announced the board secretary, her voice steady but slightly awed. With 78% of shareholders supporting the motion, the current leadership team is hereby removed from their positions, effective immediately. The cleaning lady stood calmly at the front of the room, watching as years of injustice finally came full circle. She remembered her first day at Reynolds Tech, how the CEO had walked past her as if she were invisible. Now he couldn't take his eyes off her, his face a mix of shock and dawning realization. "You'll need to clear out your office by the end of the day," one of the board members told the former CEO. "Security will escort you." The same security guards who had greeted her kindly every morning for 15 years now stood ready to escort out the man who had treated them with constant disdain. A senior board member rose from his seat. "Given the circumstances and the evidence presented, we need to discuss immediate leadership succession." He turned to the cleaning lady. "Your understanding of this company is clearly extensive. Would you consider—" "Hold on," interrupted another executive, one of the few who hadn't been implicated in the scandals. "Are we seriously considering hiring a cleaning lady as CEO?" The room fell silent. She stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. "I've worked every position in this building, from maintenance to security coordination. I hold degrees in business and computer science. I understand this company's operations from the ground up, not just from a corner office view." She clicked to a new slide on the presentation screen. "Here's my proposal for immediate company reforms, including financial restructuring, employee welfare improvements, and ethical business practices." The detailed plans showed years of careful thought and preparation. The board members leaned forward, studying the proposals with growing interest. Even the skeptical executive's eyes widened as he read through the comprehensive plans. "These are actually brilliant," he admitted reluctantly. "The cost-saving measures alone could boost our profits by 30% while improving working conditions." One of the largest shareholders, who had supported her from the start, spoke up. "I nominate her for the position of interim CEO." The motion was quickly seconded by several others. The former CEO finally found his voice. "This is insane. You can't." "The vote has already been recorded," the board secretary cut in firmly. "You no longer have any say in this matter. Security, please escort the former executives out." As security led them away, she caught fragments of their shocked conversations. "All those years. Right under our noses. We never even knew her name." The remaining board members quickly organized a vote on her appointment. The result was nearly unanimous. She would become the interim CEO of Reynolds Tech. Standing at the head of the table, she looked around at the faces that now showed respect instead of dismissal. "Thank you for your trust," she said. "I'd like to start by addressing the company's most pressing issues." She outlined her immediate plans, stopping the unjust layoffs, reviewing all discriminatory practices, and implementing transparent financial reporting. The board members nodded approvingly as she demonstrated the deep understanding of the company that 15 years of careful observation had given her. As the meeting wrapped up, she gathered her documents, thinking about all the early mornings and late nights that had led to this moment. A young employee poked her head in the door, the same one she'd seen being berated by the former CEO last week. "Ma'am," the young woman said hesitantly, "the staff heard what happened. Everyone in the break room is cheering." She smiled, remembering all the workers she'd seen struggling under the old leadership. "Tell them things are going to be different now," she replied. "We're going to build the company we all deserve." The power hadn't just shifted, it had found its way to someone who understood the true value of every employee, from the highest executive to the newest intern. The cleaning lady had become CEO, but more importantly, justice had finally been served. The morning sun streamed through the CEO's office windows, casting a warm glow across the room. The same office she had cleaned thousands of times now belonged to her. She stood for a moment, taking in the view she'd only glimpsed while wiping windows over the past 15 years. The news of yesterday's dramatic shareholders' meeting had spread like wildfire through the building. As she walked through the halls this morning, wearing a professional suit instead of her cleaning uniform, employees stopped to stare in amazement. Many smiled and nodded respectfully, especially those who had always treated her kindly during her years as a cleaner. Her first task of the day was addressing the entire company. The large conference room was packed, with employees spilling into the hallway. Some were the same people who had walked past her for years without a glance. Now they all watched intently as she stepped up to the podium. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Most of you know me as the cleaning lady who worked here for 15 years. Today, I stand before you as your new CEO. But more importantly, I stand here as someone who knows every corner of this company, every hard-working employee, and every problem that needs fixing." The room was silent, hanging on her every word. She could see hope in the eyes of the workers who had suffered under the previous leadership. "My first action as CEO is to cancel all planned layoffs in the IT department," she announced. Relieved sighs and small celebrations broke out among the IT staff. "These dedicated workers just saved our company millions by preventing a cyber attack, and they deserve recognition, not pink slips." She moved on to her next announcements. Effective immediately, all employee benefits that were cut last year are being restored. The executive bonus program is suspended until we review and reform it, and we're implementing a new policy where every manager must spend 1 week each year working alongside their frontline staff. The excitement in the room was palpable. She noticed the former CEO's assistant dabbing at her eyes, the same woman who had been denied medical leave last month. "I've seen how hard you all work," she continued. "I've cleaned your desks while you stayed late to meet deadlines. I've emptied your trash bins filled with coffee cups from all-night coding sessions. I know your dedication, and it's time you were properly valued for it." Later that day, she visited different departments, talking with employees at all levels. In the cafeteria, she sat with the maintenance staff, her former colleagues, listening to their concerns and ideas. They shared stories and laughed about how the former executives' faces had looked when they realized who she really was. The day brought a steady stream of revelations. Employees discovered that the quiet cleaning lady had noticed their extra efforts, remembered their family photos on their desks, and knew about their contributions that the previous management had ignored. In the late afternoon, she called her first executive team meeting. The remaining executives, those who hadn't been involved in the scandals, sat nervously around the table they'd previously ruled from. "I remember serving coffee in this room," she said, sitting at the head of the table. "I'd also remember every conversation about hiding problems and cutting corners. That ends today. We're going to run this company with honesty and respect." The stock price had jumped 10% on news of the leadership change. Messages of support poured in from customers, partners, and investors who had grown tired of the old management's arrogance and poor decisions. As the day drew to a close, she walked through the quiet building one last time, not as a cleaner, but as its leader. She paused by the cleaning supply closet where she'd stored her supplies for so many years. Inside, she found a small celebration set up by the cleaning staff, complete with a cake that read, "From cleaning lady to CEO, you did it." Standing there with her former colleagues, sharing cake and happy tears, she realized that the sweetest part of victory wasn't getting revenge on those who had looked down on her. It was having the power to finally make things right for everyone who had been overlooked and undervalued. The former executives had thought they were untouchable in their corner offices. They never imagined that their downfall would come from the cleaning lady they had mocked for so long. Sometimes, she thought with a smile, the best view of a company isn't from the top down, it's from the ground up. 6 months had passed since the day the cleaning lady became CEO of Reynolds Tech, and the changes were remarkable. The company's headquarters buzzed with a new energy, and the transformation went far beyond just the bottom line. The old executive dining room had been converted into a common area where employees from all levels ate together. Today, she sat sharing lunch with a mix of programmers, maintenance staff, and managers. The artificial barriers that had once divided the company were gone. "Remember when this room was off-limits to most of us?" laughed one of the custodial staff, taking a bite of his sandwich. "Now look at us, having lunch with the CEO." The company's performance had soared. Without the burden of corrupt leadership and wasteful spending, profits were up 40%. But more importantly, employee satisfaction had reached an all-time high. She walked through the office, remembering how she used to clean these same spaces in the early morning hours. Now, instead of empty desks and coffee stains, she saw engaged employees who greeted her with genuine smiles. The new mentorship program she'd started was thriving. Today, she passed a conference room where a senior developer was teaching coding skills to the maintenance staff who wanted to advance their careers. No one's potential would be wasted anymore because of their current position. The market analysts were right, commented one of the board members during their monthly meeting. Ethical leadership really did increase our value. The company's stock price had steadily climbed as news spread of the positive changes. But the most significant transformation wasn't in the numbers, it was in the culture. The fear and tension that had once filled the halls was replaced by collaboration and respect. Employees no longer worried about being humiliated in meetings or losing their jobs without cause. She had implemented a unique policy requiring all new executives to spend their first week working in different departments, including maintenance and cleaning. "You can't lead what you don't understand," she often said, remembering her own journey. In the IC department, which she'd saved from layoffs, innovations were flourishing. Free from fear and micromanagement, the team had developed 3 groundbreaking solutions that were now driving company growth. The old executive washrooms had been renovated into a daycare center for employees' children. Walking past it, she smiled at the sound of children's laughter, a sound that would have been considered unprofessional under the old leadership. Her office, once a symbol of isolation and privilege, now had an open-door policy. Today, a young intern nervously poked her head in with an idea for improving customer service. The same intern who might have been ignored 6 months ago now had the CEO's full attention. The former executive's legal troubles had made the news, but she focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. The company had implemented strict new ethical guidelines and transparency measures to ensure such abuse could never happen again. Late one evening, as she prepared to head home, she passed the cleaning staff starting their night shift. They chatted warmly, sharing stories about their families. She still knew all their names, their struggles, their dreams, just as she had when she worked alongside them. "You know what's different now?" one longtime employee said during a company meeting. "It's not just that we're more successful, it's that we're proud to work here. We're proud to tell our families where we work." The company's story had become a symbol of transformation in the business world. Other corporations were starting to re-examine their own cultures and practices. The cleaning lady who became CEO had shown that true leadership could come from anywhere, and that treating people with dignity wasn't just right, it was good business. As she left the office that evening, she paused by the window where she used to start her cleaning routine each morning. The city lights sparkled below, just as they had all those years she spent planning and waiting. But now the view was different, not because she was seeing it from the top floor, but because she had changed what people saw when they looked at Reynolds Tech. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of dignity. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who know what it's like to be invisible. And sometimes, just sometimes, karma works in beautiful ways to bring justice to those who deserve it most.